So customer segments, these are finally, some human beings. Your customers are not businesses. Even if you are selling to a business, somebody in that business who's a human being is making decisions. So if you need to understand the customer's need, you cannot understand the company's need. You need to understand the person who is buying your product, that person's need or problems or pains. So it is the person that has the need that you are trying to sell to, or the problem that you are trying to solve for. And value propositions are benefits that they will get, and it is not your solution. Your solution does not automatically become a value proposition, or the features of your solution are not value proposition. You can say, I can do what the customer is currently doing 10 times faster, right? That's the feature of your product. It becomes a benefit to the customer only if by doing it 10 times faster the customer is gaining something. Just because you can do something faster, it is not value proposition for the customer. Just because you can sell it at a lower price, it is not necessarily value proposition for the customer. So value propositions are not what you think your product can do. It is what the customers will get by using your product. So think about it from that point of view. So can we have some examples from the room? What do you think the value propositions are for your customers, for your business? What's your business?
We manufacture
Vehicle?
electric vehicle charge
Electrical vehicle charge stations,
stations.
right?
From standard charges, we manufacture fast charger, which will enable the electric vehicle to charge 80% faster than the charger.
Okay. So what is the value proposition?
The time and the key check what we give to the customer using our chargers.
So the moment I ask the question, what is the value proposition, you should ask me the question, for whom? So the moment you start answering the question, it can charge faster, it tells me that you're not thinking about the customer. You're thinking about your product. This is how we describe our product, and we believe that it is benefit for the customer. My product can charge 80% faster than the chargers available in the market. That's my product, that's my product's feature, but it is not necessarily value proposition for the customer. The moment you say something like this, then immediately ask the question, for whom? Because they are so tightly linked, right? What if somebody does not want it 80% faster? Why do we assume that everybody will want it 80% faster?
When the people what they're using the vehicles, fuel, they're using fuel, it's just time, it doesn't take much time to fuel the vehicles. But when you take an electric vehicle, the main drawback that what they see is the time which takes to charge.
Correct. So it's a good assumption to make, right? One of the good assumptions that I can make about what customers may need is less time to charge. Similarly, faster, cars, because the electric cars today are much slower than the petrol and diesel cars. So I may not be buying an electric car only because it takes time to charge. I may be deciding not to buy an electric car because it does not go more than 75 kilometers per hour. So you don't know who is looking for what value proposition, which is why you need to ask the question, for whom? And I may be looking for a longer battery life. So this brand gives me 140 kilometers for one charge, and another brand gives me 300 kilometers for one charge. But that 300 kilometers brand is 10 times more expensive than this brand. I can't afford it. So what is my pain here? I want it, but what is my pain? I can't afford it. So therefore the value proposition for me is very different. So when you say mine can charge 80% faster, it is what your product does, it is a feature of your product, it is not a value proposition to your customer. So immediately ask the question, for whom? So not every electric vehicle or EV owner is going to be jumping in joy if you release your product in the market. But there is a segment of people who are currently using electric vehicles and will immediately buy your solution, or who are not buying electric vehicles because of this reason and they'll start buying. So who will benefit? The electric vehicle manufacturers will benefit from your product, isn't it? So who's the customer then? It's not the electric vehicle car owner for you.
They are also targeting.
You can target them, but who's going to pay you?
Uh,
Yes? So that's how you think about customers and about value propositions. So the clarity is very important. Who needs it and why? That question is very, very important. How many, we can look at any example in this room. Anyone else would like to try? What you think are value propositions for your product? What are you thinking? Yes. Right. How big is the market size for you? And how did you arrive at this 35 million? So there may be 35 million people who are diabetic, or there may be 35 million people who are testing their sugar levels at least X times in a month or in a quarter. So we don't know what that data means. So 35 million is a number that we cannot go by. So your value proposition, according to you, is people can test their blood sugar levels any number of times in a day because they don't have to prick themselves. Right? But who will want it? That's the question. It sounds like a benefit, but you're building a business here, right? You're not trying to show the world that you have found something that is valuable. You want to make money out of that. Therefore, you need somebody to pay you. Who will pay you? Replace that, right? So there are glucometers in the market. You will replace the product in the market. Who will not want you to succeed? So why will people therefore switch to your product? Because it is, pain free, right? Painless, and therefore people who are currently using glucometers will switch, and that is the market size that you're aiming at. Fine, but what is the benefit for them? Only this, painless?
Painless, and I have spoken with 300 to 400 plus patients. They say that most of the patients are advised by doctors to screen at least 3 to 4 times a day, but they neglect it because due to the blood pain involved with it. So they just take the fasting and fasting and keeping it after. So that's they take that time. The other time we just leave it, and only if someone insists them to take it, they will.
So you are making some assumptions here. One, you are making an assumption that doctors advise diabetic patients to test their blood sugar levels multiple times a day. That assumption has to be validated. It's not necessarily a valid assumption. They don't advise every diabetic patient to measure their blood sugar levels every day, multiple times. In fact, they don't do it actually. Right? So if that is invalidated, then what else do you want to validate? This is a fundamental assumption you are making. And then the next assumption you are making is people are not doing it because they have to prick themselves. That's the second assumption. And then the third assumption is people will switch if I launch this painless option in the market. Make these assumptions, but right now they are only assumptions. All that we are saying is validate them. If you don't validate them, and if you simply say that I am launching a painless blood sugar monitoring system, great, it's an innovation, but can you turn it into a business? That's the question. If you have to make it a business, I can charge, EV batteries 80 times faster. Sounds good. I can, I can make blood sugar monitoring painless. Sounds great. How many customers will buy? The economics, will it work for you? Will you make enough money? Will you be able to deliver the solution? All of that comes later, but first the need itself has to be validated. How big is the problem? Is this the biggest problem? If I am a diabetic patient and I have been asked to check my blood sugar levels, let us say 3 times a day, I am not doing it today, that's a fact. But why am I not doing it today? You don't know that. You are making an assumption that I am not doing it today because I don't want to prick myself. I may be, not able to afford a glucometer. That's why I am not doing it. Or I may not believe in what the doctor is saying and I don't want to do it. Or I may not be doing it for many other reasons. Right? That's what needs to be validated. So why do people want a painless option? Painless option is your feature. It's not a value proposition. Why people want that painless option and want to pay you money for that is the value proposition. Do you understand the difference between the feature and the value proposition? Right? So you can make the fastest car, you can make the lowest cost, whatever product that you are making. It is not necessary that those are value propositions for your customers. Those are your product's features, your product's capabilities. Value propositions are very different, and we cannot answer the question in isolation from the customer segment or for whom. So a painless blood sugar level monitoring device is not relevant for somebody who does not have to monitor their blood sugar levels. Right? So one, it's not even relevant. Two, it's not that every diabetic patient will have to monitor their blood sugar level 3 times a day. So it's not necessary for every diabetic patient. So like that, you need to think about who will really need my product and then validate it. So it is probably for those patients who are more than X, number of sugar, the level is very high and they have been advised. And what percentage of diabetic patients are actually in that segment? How many of them have to be monitoring their sugar levels multiple times a day? How many of them are not doing it because of what reasons? You need to validate all of that. You cannot simply make the assumption that because it's a painless option, everybody will love it. That's what we are saying here. Anybody else? You have this question? What you are thinking about your product's value proposition and what it really is. Do you have the question? You're very clear about the value proposition? Give me one more example of a value proposition, then we'll move on. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Suraj. My product, we are actually a service-based company, more of a service. So we make science study better from 8th standard to 12th standard. In that specific, before people, we are trying to make their science studies better through experiments.
So you believe, therefore, that the current way of teaching science between class 8 and 12 is not good enough.
Absolutely.
Right? Don't say absolutely. That's what you believe.
No, I studied.
Right. No, I also studied. Right? But that's your fundamental assumption or a premise on which your idea is being built. Number one. Number two, through experiments, you believe that they can learn better. Again, that's your assumption. And three, more importantly, you believe that almost everybody who's studying between class 8 and 12 will jump if I launch my solution.
Not like that.
Okay, some of them.
Yeah.
Who are they?
Indian middle class and
So then you need to make assumptions about who will find it valuable. So teaching science through experiments is not necessarily a value proposition. Somebody who needs to benefit from that. You believe that everybody who goes through your program will find it beneficial. But I may not be interested in learning science better than the way I am learning it now, because I am not even interested in science, right? So then that's the question, for whom? And that's what we are trying to find out, because the value proposition. So if I am somebody who is aspiring to become a scientist in NASA, and I want my foundations to be right, or I don't know, but my parents believe that I should become a scientist in NASA, and they want my foundation to be better, and if you charge me even 1 lakh, my parents are willing to spend, because they also believe like you, that learning through experiments will make me learn science better. Because the value here is not just learning science through experiments. The value here is I am building the foundation to become a scientist in NASA. Like that, some other parent may say, I just want my son to score better marks in science. The need is very different. They are not trying to send their son to NASA. They just want their son to get better marks. And they may be willing to pay money to to go through your program, right? But somebody will find value in what they are getting through your program, and they decide. You don't decide for them. Just because you believe that your product is better, learning through experiments is better, and you can teach science better, it is not necessary that people will also find the same reason to buy your product. So, what are their reasons to enroll to your program is the question here. That's the value proposition.
You say that better mark or
So, there could be number of reasons, right? One of the benefits could be better scores in science. So, then who are looking for better scores in science is the next question. Not everybody who is studying in between class 8 and 12 are looking for better scores in science. So, who are those people who are looking for better scores in science, and for what? Just better scores or for something else? That's really how we do the discovery. We ask the question why, and why, and then finally we understand the value proposition for which people are willing to pay money. Because at the end of the day, we are running a business here. This is not just proving to the world that learning through experiment is better. We want to build a business out of it. We want people to pay you. They need to have the right reason to pay you. They decide whether they should pay you or not. So, you need to understand the value proposition for them. Accordingly, if you have your product that meets their value proposition, they will be willing to pay you. So, it is nuanced. It is not something that we usually think about. This is not how we think about. What I am saying is not what we usually think about. When we build something better than what we think is already available in the market, we believe that people will buy it. But that's not how businesses work, right? So this is really where we start. This is critical. This is the first question, who needs it and why. If we don't have the answer with great clarity, then it's going to be very difficult for us to answer the next two questions. How can we deliver that value? Then you go to the business model canvas. There are other blocks in the business model canvas, which are customer relationships, channels, key resources, activities, and partners. So this is what these are the questions you answer in these boxes. Channels, for example, how do they like to buy? If I am launching a product that is meant for senior citizens, and if I make that product available only online, will they be able to buy? How do they like to buy rather than how I think I want to sell? So these are the questions you ask here. And then the customer relationships, we are going to spend some time here, because many of you are trying to do something here. Value propositions we saw. Key activities, what will I do inside my organization which are critical to delivering this value proposition, and in order for me to perform those activities, what are the key resources? And then who else do I need to work with to deliver that value proposition? Right. So channels, very quickly. We have very less time? No, right? 25 minutes one, right? Okay. We are supposed to stop at 5:30, right? Okay. All right. So channels, like I said, how does the product get from your company to the customer's hands? And here the key question is not how you want to send it to the customer, but how the customer wants to get it. So even if it's a service, how would the customer like the service to be delivered to him or her? That's the question here. So you can have physical channels, you can sell it through stores, you can sell it through distributors, dealers. You will have physical infrastructure for your physical product, or you may have virtual. If it's a service or if it's a software, you're not really selling it physically, but you are still delivering the product or service to the customer. So you can think about what are the different ways in which my customer would like to buy, and then test them. Don't assume that if I sell it through distributors or through retailers, my customers will buy it. Just test that assumption also, that this is how my customers are used to buying a product like this. Not necessarily your product, but product like this. So here, for example, this is a business which very clearly articulates what is the value proposition. Can you find, there are two things that you can find in this statement: value proposition and channels. What is the business? Selling indoor plants. What is the value proposition? Sorry? Delivered to your doorstep is the value proposition. Real life is the value proposition. Real life is okay, because anybody who's selling indoor plant will have the same value proposition, right? But the key here is their channel itself becomes the value proposition for them. You see how they have been able to use the channel, and then they say straight from the greenhouse to your door. That is the value proposition. You can buy indoor plants. You can go to a store and buy indoor plants, and it may take 3 hours for you to reach home, right? And it may be not in the same shape that you bought when you bought it. And it may be huge that you may have to hire some truck to carry it. It may be difficult for you to carry. So all of these is what they figured, that one, it has to be fresh. It has to be life that is fresh, and two, it is delivered at your doorstep. So they actually made this their value proposition. Make sense? Customer relationships, we'll be spending some time here. This is the get, keep, grow. This is the virtual loop, viral loop, and this is the the funnel, and then how you grow. The funnel through which you keep customers, and then you grow customers. We'll see some more of this. Example. This is what Google, right? But what is Google here? Search engine, right? That's how they started their business, right? They started their business as a simple search engine. But what business are they in now? Everything. So that's what their get, keep, grow strategy is. Basically, this was their strategy to get, and this is their strategy to keep and grow, right? So you think about your strategies to acquire customers, keep them, and grow. These are the 3 stages in customer relationships: acquiring customers, retaining them, and growing them. This is how Google did it, right? Key resources. What are the most important resources that you need in your organization? They can be physical resources like buildings or your plant and machinery. Can be intellectual property. Your IP may be your most valuable resource. Human resources. Not every human resource is a key resource, but you may have some critical resource that is extremely important for you to develop and deliver the value proposition. So for example, the scientist could be a key resource, because if that is really where your product requires the most from. Finance, you need money, that can be a key resource, right? Partnerships, who are those people that I can work with who will do some of my key activities so that I don't have to do it. But the way I look at partners is not just look at them as outsourcing options. You don't say, I am finding a partner who will attend calls. If attending calls is not a key activity and if you are giving it to somebody else, that is simple outsourcing. It's not a partnership. A partnership is where your partner has something to gain or lose by doing business with you. Otherwise, they are not partners. What's in it for them is as important as what's in it for me. That's key partners. So, if they don't have a reason to partner with you, why will they partner with you? Key activities, those activities which are critical for you to develop and deliver your value proposition. So I'm not going into the details of this because we want to spend some time on the customer relationships. And also, since many of you are in the customer validation stage, you probably are beyond the customer discovery stage. But it is still worth if you can go back and ask those questions and see whether you are still in the discovery stage or you are in the validation stage. It's up to you. Finally, the question is, can I make enough money? Is this business worth doing at all? That you get answers to when you look at the bottom two boxes of the canvas. The cost and the revenue. Obviously, you would like your revenue to be more than the cost, right? Otherwise, it does not make sense. But find out early enough. There are revenue models and there are pricing strategies, pricing tactics, and I'm not going into the details of that now. So all of these are available free online. The business model canvas is free. You can download it. All the material about the business model canvas and the 9 blocks are available for free. There are videos available. There are materials available. You can watch them. You can read them. Quickly, we can probably look at, this is something very important. You need to think about how will you make money in your business. So how do you think Netflix makes money? Subscriptions, right? How do you think Flipkart makes money? Ola? Commission. LinkedIn? Advertising. So like that, you think about how you will make money. And LinkedIn makes money not just through advertising, they have other products like Google. They also have a business now, they have a variety of products. Similarly, Ola also has different products. But yes, very quickly we can say that they are in the business of providing taxi and making commission, or e-commerce selling and making commission. That's what we say. So you think about your business. How are you planning to make money? Are you going to sell your product? Are you going to lease it? Are you going to license it? Are you going to give it on rent? How are you planning to make money? Think about it right from the beginning. Cost structure, there are, it's not any cost. And you don't decide, when you're a startup, you don't have a lot of money to throw away, right? So you don't spend money on things which are not supporting your key activities and key resources. You need to be, thinking million times before you spend your money. So you will have costs associated with this, but more importantly, make sure that you have enough costs provided for your key activities and key resources. And if you have allocated a lot of money for a plush office, but that's not going to help you deliver the value proposition, then that's not how you should be spending your money. So think about the costs, where you want to spend your money, and also think about the structure of the cost. How much of it should be fixed? How much should be variable? Fixed cost is not good, especially when you have limited money. You would not want to risk by keeping 19% of your costs as fixed cost. You would like to have some flexibility. You would like variable costs. Think about them. Finally, is your business sustainable? You want to make more money than what you spend, even before you run out of all your money. Customer discovery is the process through which we actually test our assumptions and validate. So you ask the question, how do we test? Customer discovery is the process. Customer development framework has got these 4 stages. The first 2 stages are customer discovery and customer validation. We are now talking about the first stage, which is customer discovery. Customer discovery is this. So you are the founder of your company. You have some vision for your product, you have some vision for your company, right? How do you, how do you turn all the assumptions and guesses that you are making about your business, your customers, how much money you will make, which market you will be selling at, how many units will you be selling, in the next 10 years? How do you convert all these assumptions to facts? Is the process of customer discovery. Validating your assumptions is the process of customer discovery. So the key word here is hypothesis about each of the 9 blocks of the canvas that you are making. I am assuming that this person is my customer. I am assuming that this is the benefit to this customer, and I am assuming that this is how I will make money. I will sell my product, and I am assuming that I need some partners. I am assuming that my customers will buy online. I am assuming that my customers will like to come back and they will refer more customers. All these assumptions that you are making about each of the 9 blocks of the business model canvas. So you create your assumptions or hypothesis about them, and then you actually go and test. The experiments here are about the experiments here mean conversations that you have with potential customers who you think will have the need to buy your product or will have a problem that you can solve and make money out of. And this is a typical attitude of a startup, right? We think we know. We think we already know that people are finding it difficult or finding it very inefficient when it takes 6 hours to charge the car battery. They would like to get it done in 2 hours. That's an assumption that we are making. And we don't really go and test it. So this is a typical attitude of any innovator. Right? But that's not going to help in business. So the first principle of customer discovery is get out of the building. Get out of the building meaning don't sit in the office and make assumptions about what your customers need and why they will love your product, why they will pay you a lot of money, why they will queue up to buy your product, and the problems that they are facing. Don't make assumptions. Make assumptions, but go and test them, and you cannot do that sitting in your office. You need to get out of the building, and you cannot do it through a survey. You cannot run a survey to 100 people and send emails and ask them to respond to it, and you cannot say I have validated it. A survey is useless from that point of view. If you want data, there is a lot of data, published data that is available, but use that data to make assumptions about your customers' needs and problems and pains. But you need to go and talk to them to test them. Otherwise, you are making more assumptions on assumptions, right? And again, this is not very uncommon. Because I know, like the question that he asked, customers don't even know what they want. What's the point in talking to them? How many of you think like that? It's quite common for us to think like that. Customers don't even know that this can happen. They don't even know what they want. What's the point in going and asking them what they think about my product now or what needs they have? They don't even know what they need. But that assumption is not useful if you are trying to build a business. If you want to just prove the customer wrong, you can do it. But if you are building a business, please make sure that you validate your assumptions. Don't make assumptions on behalf of customers and believe that they are facts. Validate them, and don't think that the customers don't know what they need. Customers may not tell you exactly the answer or what you are looking for. They will not tell you, I want your product. They are not going to tell you that. Or they are not going to tell you, I want something like your product. They are not going to tell you that. That does not mean that they don't have a need. If they don't have a need, then what's the point in fulfilling that need? If they don't have a problem, what's the point in solving that problem? Right? So don't assume, please test them.
Customer discovery actually happens in 2 phases. The first one, what we call understanding the problem. Another military phrase is trying to understand the order of battle. You're trying to understand everything about the lay of the land. Who are the customers? How do they work? What's their industry like? You're actually trying to be your own market research firm. But this time, instead of being some research company, you're trying
Is it audible? No, it's not audible. It's a point that he is making. What I have been saying is, first understand the problem and do not make assumptions about the problem. Validate that there is a real problem for the customer who you think has the problem. And this customer discovery cannot be outsourced. It's not a survey. You cannot get an agency to do it. Customer discovery has to be done by the founders, because you are the ones who can make strategic decisions about your business. You cannot outsource it to somebody else who will come and tell you, these are the 1,000 forms that people filled, and out of 1,000 forms, 300 forms say this and 400 forms say that. It's not useful for you, because you've not really understood the customer need. You have just gathered data, which could have been, obtained otherwise also. So the founders are the ones who are supposed to do customer discovery. Go and talk to people, have conversations, and don't have conversations about your product. This framework and the process asks you not to talk about your product or technology when you go and meet your potential customers. You simply go and listen to them, ask them about their problems and pains, and then understand what is the real problem, is there a real need, and without biasing them, without leading them, you just listen to them. That's what this process asks you to do. Of course, there are other ways that you can do it. I'm not commenting on the other ways that you can use to validate, but this process requires you to validate it only by not talking about your product or technology, simply by going and listening to what they have to say about their pains and problems. Come back and then understand what the real pain is, and then decide whether it is worth doing. That's what customer discovery is. So since it's not audible, there's no point in playing this video. I'll skip this. But it happens in two phases. That's what he was just about to say. The first phase is understanding the problem. All of you have started building something because you believe that there is a problem that is to be solved. So your product is a solution for a problem that exists in the world, right? Or there is a need that exists in the world, and which is why you are developing what you are developing. Your startup is based on that. This process asks you to spend time and understand the problem really. For example, if you have decided to make painless, introduce a painless option for checking blood sugar levels, understand the problem with checking blood sugar levels first, deep enough. How many people have the problem? Why do they have the problem? What kind of solutions are already available? What's wrong with the current solutions? What will make people move away from current solution to a new solution? Understand it well enough before you can decide that this is a solution that the world is looking for. We usually start with a solution. We don't start with the problem. When we build our startup, the first thing that we do is we have an idea and we convert that idea into a product or a service or a solution. That's the first thing that we do. We cannot avoid that, but make assumptions about who needs it and why, and test them. Don't lead your startup with a solution, lead with the problem. Understand the problem, spend time understanding the problem well enough so that you can develop the right solutions. So you may actually be able to do much better than what you had initially thought about. The solution that you had thought about may not be the best solution. You may be able to do much better than that if you know enough about the problem. But if you go with only your assumptions about the problem, your solution is going to be limited to your knowledge of the problem and your assumptions about the problem. So you are missing a huge opportunity to solve the real problem by going with your own assumptions about the problem. So spend time understanding the problem, and then he says go to the solution. So in the two phases, in the first phase, we go and talk to people without talking about our product or technology. We simply understand their pains. We come back, you call it a prototype, but actually what you can give to customers or the early adopters who can actually use the product and tell you that it is useful for them is called the MVP, or the minimum viable product. Have you heard of the term MVP, the minimum viable product? So you develop that. The minimum viable product does not have all the bells and whistles, but based on the discovery that you've had, you've spoken to customers, you can develop something that is useful for them, and then they will tell you, yes, it is useful for me. That is the testing you do in the second phase. So first phase is only having conversations without talking about the product, without talking about your idea. Second phase is based on what you heard from people, make something, give it to them, and then let them tell you that yes, it is useful. That's the second phase of customer discovery. Only then you move to customer validation. So I'm going to skip this. So you start with assumptions about these two. This is really where you start. So even if you believe that you are past this stage, that you know enough about the customer segments and value propositions, if you believe so, fine. Please answer the question clearly, who needs it and why. And if you are convinced that the answer is true and it's a fact, please go ahead. Or if you think there is an opportunity to validate it, please validate it before it gets too late. Right? This is the process. The customer discovery process works like this. You first make assumptions, that's the hypothesis, and then you test the hypothesis. At the first phase, you do these interviews or conversations with customers where we simply have conversations. We don't talk about the product. It's not a sales pitch. We are not going and doing a demo of our product. We are simply listening to them, getting them to talk and listen to them. And then we come back, we analyze, we interpret what we've heard, and then we decide whether we should adjust our solution, or sometimes we may find that the problem that I thought actually does not exist. So you can pivot on your idea. So the sooner you can pivot is better for you than going, spending 3 years and then understanding that the problem doesn't exist. That's why this process is useful. Hypothesis, for example, you can make an assumption like this. Suppose you are doing something for obese children. You can make an assumption like this. How good is this assumption for you to go and test? Suppose you are making a product for somebody like this. What do you think about this assumption? Is it a good assumption for you to go and test? No. Why is it not a good assumption? No. They're too healthy. Which parent will not want their children to be healthy? So if you go and ask 100 parents, would you like your children to be healthy? What do you think they will tell you? Of course they'll say yes. So this is how you can be biased. So you can go to EV owners and then ask them, would you like your battery to charge faster? What do you think they will tell you? Of course, yes. So that's not a good assumption to test. That's not how you test during customer discovery. Then look at this. Is it a better assumption? Is it a good assumption you can test? Right? It is better. The challenge with this is you are testing two assumptions here which are not connected with one another. So children in urban homes are overweight. It can be a fact, or you can get data to check this. Right? So you don't really need to do customer discovery to find that out. Second is they don't get enough exercise. What we are really trying to test is we believe that children in urban homes are overweight because they don't get enough exercise. Instead of saying that, we said, and they don't get enough exercise. Therefore, this is not a testable assumption. Better way to test is this, that their children are getting enough exercise. Because some parents may say, it's okay if my child plays only once in a week. So it's not for us to assume that if a child does not play at least 1 hour a day, parents, or that's not good enough for them, not enough exercise. So that's our assumption. Parents may say it's okay if they don't play every day. It's okay if they played only once in a week. So that is what you can test. If your product is based on a fundamental assumption that it is going to be useful for people because parents are willing to pay money to get an alternative solution to get enough exercise for their children every day. Suppose your product is a play gym inside the house. In urban homes, it's difficult to get space to play, but I will provide something. If that is your solution, who is it useful for? Is it for every urban home? Is it for every parent? We need to test it. So some parents may say, no, it's okay. If my child doesn't play every day, it's okay. Or they are getting enough exercise in school, I'm not worried. Right? That's why, you cannot make an assumption that parents are going to buy my product because they are all concerned about their children's health. Of course, they are all concerned about their children's health, but it's not necessary that they'll buy your product. So do that, and the business model canvas is a fantastic tool. It can be used as a scorecard. So we need to spend a lot of time on these things for you to appreciate it, but you can read a lot about it. Without me even talking about it, you can read a lot about it. Please try to find out, how you can use this. And the customer discovery process, therefore, it starts with making a good assumption, a meaningful and testable assumption, like we saw in the example. And then you are supposed to go and listen to customers. You are not going to sell. This is not an opportunity for you to sell, because the assumption here we are making is we don't have a product to sell. We are just trying to understand customer needs. Therefore, the conversation is not about selling your product. And then you go and don't ask them a direct question, what do you want? I develop software, I can develop any software, tell me what you want, I will do it. That's not how the conversation goes. It's about what they really, why they need what they need. That's what we are trying to find out. Then we have enough evidence. Then the next stage is the customer validation stage. The customer validation stage is where you have finished your customer discovery. You have found the answer to the first question, which is who needs it and why. These are the customer segments, these are the value propositions. You have tested your assumptions, you have validated them, you found the answer. Now you are moving into the second stage, which is the validation stage. You are now testing your model. Will I get one customer? Will I get 10 customers? Will I get 100 customers? If I get 100 customers, will I be able to deliver to them? You start testing all of those. And how do I even get 10 customers? I got my first customer, but how do I get my first 50 customers? What is the strategy that I need to have? Should I be offering my product for free first for the first 2 months and then make it payable? Should I be giving them a discount if I need to acquire 500 customers? Or if I spend, or if I give a 10% discount, will I get 50% more customers? All these assumptions you can test at this stage. How many of you believe that you are at this stage? You are at this stage, the validation stage, so you have the answer to the first question. Who needs your product and why do they need it? But you are now testing the pilot is already with the customer. So when you say pilot, it is either the MVP or the real product. It's the MVP. So when you are testing your MVP, you are getting validation about the value propositions. So whatever value propositions you designed your product to deliver, are they getting delivered to the customer is what you can test when you are testing the MVP. This is beyond that. This is after your MVP testing, right? This is when you have completed your MVP testing, you have a product now, you're not scaling large scale, but you are going from your first paying customer to probably the first 50 paying customers. You are testing your assumptions about what are the right channels to sell my product through because they will buy it. What kind of customer acquisition strategies should I think about now so that I can go from one customer to 100 customers within the next 3 months? And all of those things come under the customer validation phase, right? So customer validation is, the second stage. If any of you believe that you are already in this stage, it's useful for you. This is what we will do here. These are the things that we are testing in this stage. One is you are testing not the technical capabilities of your product, but your ability to make the product for a larger number of customers. You can make your product once, 1 piece, 2 pieces, 5 pieces, 10 pieces, but can you make your product for a larger number of customers? That's what we are testing here. So here we are not testing the technical capabilities of your product, but your ability to make the product for a larger number of people, right? That is in the validation stage. Then customer acquisition. Do I have the right strategies to think about acquiring new customers? How do I acquire 10 more customers within this month? How do I get 100 more customers within the next quarter? You start thinking about, you'll start making assumptions about your acquisition strategies. One strategy could be discounting, one strategy could be giving it free and then charging, one strategy could be going and participating in large exhibitions where you will get a lot of people walking in and the relevant people will be in that in that exhibition and you can sell more. So you will think about different strategies to go to a certain level before you can scale to a larger extent. So you are testing your customer acquisition strategies. You can test your pricing here because you are now really selling. You are not doing a pilot anymore, right? You are not testing your technical capabilities. You are not testing your MVP. You are actually selling your product in the market. So if you believe that customers find my product more expensive, this is the best time to test it. So I will test it at a certain price, and if that is actually not taking off, then how do I adjust my pricing? Because pricing, if you have done value based pricing, it's very subjective. So you also need to respond to the customer needs here. So that's what you test here. And then your distribution channels, you may have assumed that I should have a distributor, a dealer and a retailer, or you may have said I will sell directly to customers. All of this can get tested here during this stage. So if you are in this stage, it is good to test these, make assumptions about them and test them. If you believe that you are already past the MVP testing stage, if you have the answer to the first question, who needs it and why, now start testing these, right? But you can test them by design rather than trying to sell more every day and getting frustrated. Many of the startups, I know startups which have had very early success. There is a startup who is in the IoT for manufacturing space. Even before they completed their product development, they had their first customer, right? And the first customer happened to be a neighbor in the incubator. Because they knew about this product, they said, no, I think I will need it. So the startup was very happy, and the neighbor, in the incubator referred to another friend. They had the second customer. They believed that they have now arrived. For 2 years, they didn't get a single customer after that. What do you think could have happened? 2 people have already bought it. They paid for it, but they didn't get a single customer for 2 years after that. That's because they didn't really test any of these. They assumed that now it is done. And they were actually testing it with the wrong people. So that's what we will see when we do what we test during this stage, in the customer validation stage. What do we really need to test when we are trying to do customer acquisition? So we'll focus on customer acquisition. That comes under customer relationships, where you see this funnel, get, keep, grow. So this is how you create the funnel. You make people aware of your product or your service. You can either, pay to advertise, or you can earn when people write about you in newspapers and magazines and blogs, etc., etc. So that's free demand, and there is paid demand. You create paid and free demand, and that's the funnel, and then it goes through. So if you are selling a physical product, for example, these are the different stages that the customers will go through. First, they will become aware of your product. Second, you will create enough interest, or they will have enough interest in the product. Then they will actually start considering whether they should buy your product, and finally they buy the product. So if 1,000 people are entering the funnel, it's not necessary that all the 1,000 will be here. Probably 100 will end up actually buying your product. So if you are forming your customer acquisition strategies, you need to create enough demand. If you are targeting that you want 50 customers by next quarter, see how much demand you need to create, because they will go through these stages. What are your strategies for paid demand creation and earned demand creation? And what are your strategies to create enough interest and make them consider and make them buy your product? So then finally you get customers. Then you need to keep them for a while. Not just for the sake of keeping them, but also to make it economically viable. You have spent money to acquire them. You've spent money here. You've spent money here to acquire them throughout this funnel. And then you don't want to lose the customer just after 2 days, right? Then the money that you have spent here probably is more than the money that you have earned from them. So what is your strategy to keep them with you? And then they can then refer you to other people. You can grow businesses by introducing new products, or you can even get referrals from existing customers. So what are your strategies to grow? So this is really, what customer relationships, the viral loop that we talk about. These are the three stages: get, keep, and grow. What assumptions are you making about your acquisition strategies? Any of you? How are you making, what are you thinking about acquiring new customers? How do you think you will acquire new customers? Sorry? Direct marketing. So you want to do direct marketing to who?
We'll have a customer persona. Which customer that we are going to sell. We go there and try to have a conversation.
Okay, so that's what you think will get you more customers.
Because we are into B2B right now.
Sure.
I don't think that B2B ads and all will work. Maybe
So it's an assumption that you're making, right? You're one, making an assumption that I need to sell directly. Two, because I am in B2B, advertisements will not work. So like that, you're beginning to make some assumptions. So that's what we are asking here. What assumptions are you making about acquiring new customers? Since you are already ready to start acquiring new customers, what are you assuming? What assumptions are you making about acquiring new customers? Like he says, I am selling to businesses, so large scale advertising will not work. I need to do direct selling. That's what he is thinking. Like that, each of you may be thinking about acquiring new customers and how do you keep them, at least, for a while. So what are your strategies, right? And in the course of the last, I don't know, months and years that you have, if you have already started selling to customers, if you are in revenue or if you are doing pilots, have you learned anything that you had not thought about earlier? Anything unexpected happened? Any of you, any story about acquiring new customers? You found something that you had not thought about? No? Is it because you've not started selling, or is it because you've not learned anything new? You knew everything even before you went there.
It's not that we get something unexpected, we were expecting something, but we got more information from the customer. That is when you are trying to keep them, right? So we know more of their pain points so that we can address it in a different way.
Fine.
It is not one solution.
But look for these because you may get a lot of insights. So if you have a design and if you have a strategy for customer acquisition, you will get insights and use them. If you don't have a design and if you don't have a strategy, you will simply miss them, right? So make assumptions, validate them, and in the process, get insights and use them. Don't miss them, right? And what drives your customer acquisition and retention strategies and even growth strategies? This is very important. This is what actually primarily drives your strategy. Pricing and everything comes later. Pricing, discounting, etc. Those are actually, they're not necessarily strategies. They are very tactical. But what really drives customer acquisition is this: how well do you understand the person that you are selling to? How well do you understand their needs? How well, do you understand about what matters to them? Who influences them? Even advertising, for example, if you have to decide not to do some form of advertising, you need to know why that is not relevant for them. What influences them and who influences them. So the entire ecosystem, you need to understand. Suppose you are selling a medical or a health, a medical device. You need to understand the entire ecosystem. Probably there are some influences. Who are those influences? How do we build our customer acquisition strategies around them so that they can influence the buying and so on? So this is very important. So if you are forming your strategies about customer acquisition, don't just go and try to sell more. Don't just try to spend a lot of time and efforts trying to sell more. You may get very disappointed or frustrated at times because you are putting in a lot of efforts. Instead, actually think enough about the people that you are selling, understand their needs, understand who are their influences, understand their buying process, spend time in understanding these, then you can come up with the right strategies. Then your efforts are a lot more, rewarding. than what you are putting in, right? So a lot of startups say, I tried for 2 years, the same company, first two customers came very easily, then they waited for 2 years, nothing happened. In those 2 years, they spent a lot of money, they met a lot of people, they did a lot of demo, and what was missing really was they didn't understand the archetype really well. They were going and selling their solution to the people on the shop floor, and they all said, we love it, can I have it tomorrow? Unfortunately, they are not the decision makers, they are the users. The people who had to make the decision and pay for the solution were completely away from the people that I was meeting. And then they went and did demo to the senior management, and the senior management said nice demo, but they didn't still give them a purchase order, because the product was not solving anything for the senior management, it was solving the problems only of the user. So they were not able to understand the value propositions for the decision maker, and they were spending 2 years talking to the wrong people. Which is why it's very important. If they had understood what the VP of manufacturing is looking for or the CEO is looking for, accordingly, if they had created the value propositions, they would have had many more orders. So this is one example where the wrong understanding or lack of understanding of archetype can slow you down or can make you wonder why you are not getting more customers. Okay. So customer archetypes, this is again just to re-emphasize the point. You need to really understand them well, and you also need to be sensitive to the cost. You don't want to spend a lot of money trying to acquire a customer. You need to run a viable business. So how do you actually look at the customer acquisition cost and the value? These two numbers are very important. You need to learn how to calculate this. It's extremely important, otherwise you will be spending a lot of money. Suddenly you will realize that I'm not making money or I'm losing money. Why am I losing money? I don't know. So this is how it works. The acquisition cost is how much do you spend to acquire a customer. So a lot of times the startups say my product will sell more because it's going to be cheaper. How do you even know that it's going to be cheaper in the market? You're only looking at the cost of making the product, and that's why you are selling. The value proposition is lower cost, and people will buy it because it's 20% cheaper than the products available in the market. You cannot make that mistake because you don't know how much money will you be really spending to acquire a customer. You're only looking at the cost of manufacturing. Suppose it costs 10 rupees to manufacture, and in an alternative solution is selling it at 100 rupees, you will say I will sell it at 90% cheaper rate, or you will say at least 50% cheaper than existing solutions. But when you actually go and sell to the number of customers your competitor is selling to, you will be surprised that you will not be able to sell it at 10 rupees or even at 100 rupees. Your cost may be even more than the cost that they are incurring. So think about customer acquisition cost. I'll just show you what goes into calculating the customer acquisition cost. Don't just look at the cost of making your product. That is not the cost that you should be looking at. Lifetime value is how much money can you be making from that customer. If your customer will stay with you for 3 years, in 3 years how much money will you make? If your customer will just buy your product and disappear, that one time value, how much will you get from the customer? You compare that and then you decide. So the customer acquisition cost is all the money that you are spending. Even before this you made your product, right? But on top of that you are spending money for creating demand, creating awareness, interest, generating interest, pre-sales cost. There's so much cost that you will incur. So everything that you incur here, if you add them up, that is the customer acquisition cost. And everything that you get here is your lifetime value. The customer stays with you, continues to pay you money, and probably even refers, and therefore you make more money. That's the lifetime value. Your lifetime value and customer acquisition cost, what should be the right ratio? Suppose your customer acquisition cost is 100 rupees, and if your lifetime value is 3000 rupees, is it good? It's good. Suppose your customer acquisition cost is 1000 rupees, and if your lifetime value is 1200 rupees, is it good? Not good? Why? Your cost is 1000 and you are earning 1200. Is it good? So at a certain scale, it may still be viable for me, but it may not be viable if it is not at that scale, right? Because there is a very thin difference between, my cost and the money that I am making, right? And future is unpredictable. So, is there a good ratio to look at? Actually, no. But typically, the software companies or the IT companies, typically they look at least 3. They want 3 times the cost as the lifetime value. But you can have a different ratio, you can have a different number, but it has to be greater than the cost, at least. And you need to balance them. So you cannot simply push the cost down and make your company profitable, because you cannot push cost down all the time. And what are those things which can come in the way of this balance? The cost of acquiring a customer, you're acquiring sales cost and you're acquiring marketing cost. And what can help you reduce your cost of acquiring a customer is generating a lot of free demand using social media, for example. But if you depend only on social media for demand generation, you may be missing a lot of sales. So you need to balance it. Don't try to push the cost down and increase the revenue. It's not going to happen. You need to keep them in balance. Similarly, when you are making money, you will always want to make more money, but what are those things that will come in the way of making more money? You need to be careful, and then you need to balance it when you're monetizing. So this is how the economics work. So you spend some money to make your product, right? Typically, we believe that this is the cost, and therefore I believe that my product will be cheaper in the market. Big mistake. On top of that, you also will want some margin. Even if you are selling only 1 unit, you will want to sell it at a price that gives you some profit or some margin. So you decide what is that. And then general sales, general administration cost, there are so many costs involved in that, general and administration and sales cost. Then you also will have R&D costs, ongoing R&D costs. You add them up. Then if you have channels like distributors, retailers, or resellers, they will get some money out of it. They will get some commission, they will get, the sales commissions, etc. They will have their own margins. And then you may want to offer some discounts. So all that goes in, and then finally you fix your price. Suppose you have fixed the price here and you are able to accommodate all of this, you're still okay. But if you have fixed the price somewhere here and then you have all of these costs to incur, then the economics don't work. So if you are thinking about acquiring new customers, great, but also think about the cost of acquiring customers. Each, of your strategies will have certain costs, but there are some costs that you may easily ignore. So keep them in mind and then calculate your customer acquisition cost. I think I have some more, but I don't think we have time. I think I should stop now. Quickly, I want to ask any questions you have. Do you feel we have covered too much, or do you feel we are now actually getting into what we should be getting into? You would like to know more, or you have any questions about what we have already covered? This is not something that you can sit through a presentation and feel good or bad about. This is for you to apply in your own startups. You need to decide now, where are you in the 4 stages? Are you in the discovery stage, or are you in the validation stage? If you believe that you are already in the validation stage, think about customer acquisition, think about testing, your ability to scale at least to the threshold level before you can make your company a big company when you are ready to exit the incubator. Think about all of them and validate. Make assumptions and validate them. Don't just believe that you already know. That's all. Any questions?
What would be the good payback?
There is no standard payback period.
That is the most important actually decision we have to take.
So you need to decide, because different businesses and different industries have got different payback period. There are some industries,
If they wait for years,
the nature is they are very capital intensive.
They are able to sell in the cheaper rate, but they know very well that at the end of few years they will get back.
Correct. But as a startup, we would like to be profitable sooner than later. So we don't have the deep pockets that large companies have. So when we set up the company, the company Tata Sky, we knew that we were not going to make money for 7 to 10 years. But we were okay to fund the company for that long. So we were actually incurring losses. We felt happy when we became EBITDA positive. We were not even truly profitable, but we were very happy because we knew that it's going to take that long. Because the irony is, every customer that we were acquiring, we were losing money because we were subsidizing. Our customer acquisition cost was so high. The lifetime value or the value that we were getting from customers was less than the money that we were spending. So if we go with this ratio, then we were stupid to have launched that business. But we took the call to launch the business because we were assured money. We had the money to survive and even grow our business for 7 years. But now we are profitable. Now they are profitable, not we. Right? So different industries have got different payback period. But as a startup, how long can you wait? You cannot wait for years to start making money.
Any plan in future?
Yes, depends on how much money you have.
Months or it can be a few years. What is the more common?
But it depends on how much funding you have. Suppose you have a product that is futuristic and your funders are very confident that when you reach a certain threshold level, you will start making money, and I'm willing to fund you till then. That's fine. So then what matters is not the payback period, it is the ability to get funding to go till then. Yes. So if you have investors who are willing to back you for 5 years without any profits, please go ahead.
And another point out is Ola, Uber, they report Flipkart, they report losses. What is the meaning of those losses?
So they are like the Tata Sky business, for example, they know that they are not going to be profitable, right? But what they are doing is building their companies for the future. There is a valuation. So for example, Flipkart sold to Walmart. The startup founders made their money, and Walmart sees some value in buying that company because it is a strategic investment that they've made. It fits in their plan, right? So therefore, it makes sense for them to continue to make losses, but their valuation is very high. So Flipkart proved that the valuation that they got or whatever they had assumed was worth waiting for, because Walmart bought it at a very high price. For the amount of money that they paid, it was a fantastic deal for both sides actually. There are many businesses now who are not profitable, but they attract great funding because there is a belief in the model, in the business model. Any other questions? Anyone? Anything that
Is there, just out of curiosity, is there any companies who does this business? I mean, they will go and they will give to clients as a service. I mean,
I will do it for you if you pay money?
out of
No, there's no company like that. It's just that, like I said, the founders have to do it. There is no alternative. If you get somebody else to do it, it's not useful. You have to do it yourself. But I can create a good business model and I can do it for you. Anyone else? I know this has not gone into the details of anything that we discussed today. We have just, touched or scratched the surface. There's a lot more to go into, but there is a lot of material available. Now that we've had this opportunity to talk about some of these, they are not theory. They are not for you to read and understand. They are for you to truly apply to your business models and make your startup successful. Enough material and videos are available online. Everything is free. You don't need me. Please look at them, and then you'll probably get some value, and then you can apply it to your businesses. Right? Thank you. Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much, sir. Just to mention that I mean, sir has done a wonderful job trying to cover in 2 hours, something which requires days, perhaps even months, what he does at IIT Madras. But we are hoping to have a follow-on workshop as well. Hopefully, we'll kind of plan it out with sir, which is for the startups of IIT Madras Incubation Cell and RTBI. We will circulate that information. That will be a more intensive one-on-one workshop, which we hope you will all leverage. So. That will be for your, yes, for your individual businesses. So we will circulate that information, and hopefully there'll be a lot of homework which you'll do and come prepared for the session. We'll circulate that information in due course, yeah. And just as a token of that appreciation, so could we have a good round of applause for this?